I was with a group last week in Italy, and I was introduced, and I was about to say something, but I wanted to take a deep breath. Everyone else was talking about slowing down. So I thought I would do a prototype of slowing down. And I took a deep breath, and I was just waiting for the room to calm down. And somebody said, well, aren't you going to talk?
They do that in Italy.
They do that. So it's wonderful to be here. I want to thank Jacob. I want to thank all of the sponsors. This is just a wonderful group of people. And I also want to thank all of you for listening to me in English. I really appreciate your capacities in multiple languages and your willingness to listen to me in the only language that I can really be fluent in. As Jacob said, I am one of the founders of the Taos Institute. And the Taos Institute came together with a unique kind of purpose. We didn't say it that way. We were really a bunch of colleagues and friends who said, what would happen if we came together to further the ideas of social constructionism in the world, and particularly in the arenas of family therapy, Harlene Anderson's work in organizations, my work, David Couperet's work, in the academy, Ken and Mary and Sheila. So we brought these different sectors together, all wondering about what can we learn from each other from this notion of social constructionism. Now, what is sort of at the heart of that is a very different understanding of communication. And one of the things I'm going to do, I don't have PowerPoint slides, by the way. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking at times about, well, there's this old paradigm, this way that we've always thought about things. And then we have a new paradigm. It might be emerging, it might be something that you all, the work you've been doing, but I'm going to at times go back and forth about that. And at the foundation of the Taos Institute is a different kind of understanding of communication. The old paradigm, being a communication scholar, was that communication, we call it the package theory. You know, I get these ideas in my mind, and the clearer my ideas are, and I put them into my words, and then I say them and toss them to him. And if I've been clear in my mind, clear in my package, and clear in my tossing them to her, she'll understand exactly what I mean. Ha. Right? So we know it doesn't work that way, and yet still, their schools are teaching that. And what we at Taos Institute sort of stand for in social construction says, now communication is really the essence of how we make meaning together. That there is no there in your mind, Diana. There is no package to pass on until we've come together and we've met and we have dialogue. And so at the foundation of Taos Institute is this interesting idea of co-construction. You know, we've been using these words, and I think they're just now coming into more clarity, even for those of us who've been involved bringing them into the world for a long time. And so we say that everything that we hold to be true, good, meaningful to us gets created in relationship. And so we put an emphasis. Sometimes we say we privilege our relatedness and our language and the practices, the relational practices with language. Those are the kinds of things. Now, Jacob was so complimentary to say I've been part of the Taos Institute movement, as has Bliss Brown, and she's been here working with many of you for many, many years. So she's also in this community for, I'm not going to say a long time, Bliss. A long time. So she's really taken this work and other work that she's brought in to some very new ways. So Taos, yes, has appreciative inquiry at its heart. It's one of the many relational processes. I have been doing work for 35 years, primarily in business settings. So my early clients before the Taos Institute, before Appreciative Inquiry, were mergers and pharmaceutical companies. I lived in Philadelphia. There happened to be a lot of big pharmaceutical companies. But I was a communication person. So it made sense to me that if people are going to have to start working together, they might as well get to know each other, right? That implicit in everything we do is the relational. And so I had some amazingly great experiences with mergers, with large-scale culture change. But recently, I was at a retreat in the UK, an organization called the Brahma Kumari, who are a spiritual community. I was invited to a retreat, and the name of it was The Call of Our Time. And we began our conversation by saying, what is the call of our time? What is it that we're all being called to attend to? Because we share this planet, this globe. And there are two things that come to me. One of them is I think we are all being called, challenged, invited to understand how to organize our lives, the businesses, the welfare programs, so that we can honor diversity and the uniqueness of each person. So how do we create welfare systems and organizations that are both one whole in which we can see some commonalities, and yet we recognize that each of us is unique and different? Because each of us has that need to be different among the common. And so I think that's a challenge for all of us. Our world is becoming more and more diverse. Not just different languages, but different cultures. You know, first we had airplanes that could bring us traveling, then we've got telecommunication. Now we have people moving all around the world. And we are going to talk about the issue of refugees in the afternoon. But one of the things that's been interesting for me in reading is right now we are around the world facing the challenge of political refugees. We will soon be facing climate change refugees, people whose homeland will no longer be inhabitable because of changes in the climate. So this ability to welcome others, to integrate, and yet to maintain what's essential to us is going to become more and more important, as are all of the skills that we're working with. The second call that I think is really essential to us all, and I sort of first come to it from a colleague at the World Business Academy, Elizabeth Santoris, who is an evolutionary biologist. And she says the most essential capacity for human evolution is collaboration. It's not about the one person who is the fittest. It's about the going forward together, the relational capacity, the collaborative capacity that will enable us to sustain and endure as a people. So those are two challenges. So why not take it into my talk today? Let's look at this. And what I want to do is I'm calling what I'm talking about collaborative social design. Right? Now, Meta said almost the same words, so I felt very delighted in listening to her talk. But we could say relational, collaborative. Social design, as Meta said, not the design of things, but the design of social services, the design of cultures, the design of organizations, the designs of the relational realities within which we live, thrive, and do whatever it is we do. I want to talk first about why design and what is it to me. I think, again, we heard it, I believe it was Jody yesterday who said, we must come to the table of design now because the world we live in now was designed by other people with different values in a different time. So that's how history works. People do their best to create societies, countries, nations, organizations that will contain and care for people. But then something changes. Like, oh my gosh, we have airplanes. We can go all over the world now. We can move, we can live, we can Skype and Zoom and all of that. We migrate. We need different kinds of designs for living. So for me, that's why design. It's not just a new fad. It is absolutely essential to creating a future that will be sustainable for us. Now, what is design? Again, I really do want to sort of bow to the last keynote, Meta and Trina. I think I have it right. For me, design is about giving form to your values. Right? What is it that we value? And how do we design that into the way we live? It's easy to say, not so easy to do. I want to share an example. My best friend's daughter just graduated from university. But when she was a little girl, it was time to give her an allowance. Do you have allowances to your children? Okay, now these parents, they kind of talk about everything. You know, everything is a conscious choice, which, by the way, that's what design is. It's bringing it up, reflecting on what's going on, and making choices. And they thought, well, you know, we could give her an allowance just because she's our daughter. She's entitled to it. That's an interesting value, isn't it? But then they also thought, well, maybe she should work for her allowance, right? Another value. Let's get her to start earning and working and making a relationship with work and money. Another design. They could have designed her allowance that way. What they did is they designed what they wanted her to do with her money. So this kid at, 8 or 9 years old, and it turned out to be fabulous. So I share this story, but it's been fabulous. She received, let's say, $1. 10 cents she had to save to give away. It was a way of tithing. She needed to save 10 cents every week so that if something came along, she could give it to someone who needed it. 25 cents she had to put away in case she wanted something big later. She had to save it so that she could buy a backpack that was more expensive. And then the rest of the money, what does that add up to? 65 cents, she could spend during the week. So her parents designed an allowance that had the values of caring for other people, had the value of saving for something that you might want, and then the value of you have some money to go and do and share. It's a fantastic story about design because they really thought about it and they thought about their values. Now I'm going to ask you to think about this room. Here we are. You know, what do I want to take home from Denmark? One of these buildings. I want a place just like this. Okay? But imagine this room, and I want you just to turn to one person. How would you rearrange this room to foster storytelling among people in the room? If the value were to hear each other's stories, how would you rearrange this room? Just talk for, you're going to get 30 seconds. What would you do? Okay, ding dong, ding dong. All right. Would you do something different? Yeah? Would you? You'd do something different. Yeah. So, and we think about that. We think about design often. The way our homes might be arranged. And I'm, somewhat humbled to even think that I could talk about design in Denmark. Because yes, Denmark has a magnificent design history. And we from the outside say, there are some principles. We look at simplicity. We look at beauty and functionality together. So we see the principles that underlie beautiful Danish design and why we love it. Right? So design is the way we put our values, our principles, our deepest beliefs into form that will then inform us. I think it was Winston Churchill said, first we design our structures, and then our structures design us. So that's kind of what design is, which means it's a consciousness. It doesn't allow for complaining about, these chairs are not really organized very well. It means get up and rearrange the chairs, right? So design can be just a way of living, and it can be a very conscious organizational process. I want to talk now about some things that are important in a design process. As many of you know, some of you have heard me talk about appreciative inquiry. I happen to be one of those people who love the appreciative inquiry 4D process. I love having a structure. I'm not going to talk about it. You can read it in lots of books. But you're going to hear embedded in what I say some of the principles and the ideas of appreciative inquiry. So a guiding principle of my life, because I'm a communications scholar, has been to wonder about who's talking to whom about what. Who's talking to whom about what? I can understand an organization when I start looking for that. In many hierarchies, the executives talk to the executives, and they talk about strategy, right? And then supervisors talk to frontline employees, and they talk about why the work hasn't been done well enough, how it has to be more efficient. And I'm generalizing. But within every organization, there are language communities. There are groups of people who are in and out of various conversations. And so for me, organizational change is about changing the configuration of who talks to whom about what. And of course, we talk about bringing all the stakeholders in the room. So the first question is who's in the conversation? And that really raises the question of collaboration and all of the stakeholders. I like to say everyone whose future it is should be in the conversation. Right? Another colleague of ours, Marge Schiller, says, don't talk about me without me. Right? So the old paradigm is that we objectify. Right? We're the experts, we research them, we name them, we know about them, we objectify them, we serve them, whoever they are. But now, this new paradigm is saying, how do we be with each other? Now, there is a long spectrum in between this, right? So I've had the good fortune to be able to bring all of the stakeholders together. In Iowa, no, actually it was Idaho, one of the states in the United States, I was asked by the Department of Education to host an AI conference on services for students who are deaf and blind. Now, there was an interesting problem. One of their state officials had gotten himself a little too much drinking, and he had said publicly, we should close the school for the students who are deaf and blind. We could provide those services much cheaper. Now, it was now a year later, and the community was not able to calm down. There was no plan to close the school. Parents would move from other cities and other states to bring their children to this school. It's an exemplary school. Teachers would come. The university was teaching. And it continues now, thank you. But they didn't know what to do. It got published in the newspaper. The gossip was stronger than reality. You know, what's reality? It's the stories we tell. And those stories were more compelling. And so they said to me, will I come and do an Appreciative Inquiry Summit? And I said, only if we can get everybody in the room. Because if we only get some of the people in the room, we won't change the story. We won't change the dominant narrative. And so they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, let you tell me. Who are all the people involved? And they said, well, of course, it's the parents of our students. Oh, and it's the students who are deaf and blind. Oh, and it's the graduates of our school. Oh, and it's the governor's office. And it is the municipal representatives. Oh, and it's the business people. And it's all the NGOs that provide services for people who are deaf and blind. So we are now up to about 250 people. And by the way, it had to be open to anyone because it was a publicly funded meeting. So the invitation was in the newspaper. It was the only time I had animals in the room. Guide dogs. Right. You know when you plan a break and you want to make sure there's enough bathrooms for men and women? We had to know where the guide dogs could have their break. It was one of the most powerful learning experiences of my life. Because not only did we have flip charts for every group, we had Braille recorders. Because in our work, we mix up the groups at tables so that there were people who were deaf and people who were blind and people who were sighted and everything at every table. We didn't say, okay, blind people go here, deaf people go there. Every table was mixed up. So every table had 2 sign interpreters, because they can only work for 20 minutes each. And every table had a Braille recorder. We included everybody. Now, what was interesting, and let me see. So, got that one. We have all the people, okay? Now, I'll come back to it. So we have all the people in the room. I'll come back to the story. I'll tell the story a little bit as I go. Okay, I just decided that. The second point that is important when doing social design work is to have a narrative-rich environment. The more stories you can get floating around of people's experience and the ideas and information from the experts, you want to blend it, but the more stories, the richer the possibility for envisioning alternative futures. With appreciative inquiry, we say, we always look back at the best of what has been. And that serves as a database for what we might imagine into the future. And Jacob and I have written a little short interview that we'll do this afternoon to launch us. But that notion of if things are stuck, if people get argumentative, stop, have people tell a story. Take a walk and tell a story to one other person. Because we fall in love with people when we hear their stories. We argue with ideas. If I said to you, make a list of the 3 things that contribute to great teamwork, each of you would have a different list. Now come together and make one list. Can you imagine? You can already hear the arguing, right? You know. But if I said, get together and share stories of the best team that you've ever been part of, a time when teamwork enabled you to do something that you could not have done otherwise, people would be going, oh, wow, I can do that. We get ideas from each other. We can steal ideas. And we go away already with new ideas that we can put into practice. So narrative becomes essential. The third bit, and this is where you will definitely hear appreciative inquiry, is an affirmative stance. You could call it an appreciative stance. Some people say a positive stance. And I don't mean pat people on the back and say, nice job. I mean the ability to shift from deficit discourse to images of possibility, to the affirmative. Right? If there used to be an activity in the field of organization development where you would teach someone with a blindfold on their eyes how to bowl. Do you know bowling? Do we have that? And many people would say, no, don't do that. Don't hold the ball so tight. What am I supposed to do? No, don't step first with your left foot. What am I supposed to do? When we give directions in the negative, we are not telling people how to conduct themselves. If someone says instead, hold the ball lightly, and as you move your arm forward, gently let go, and actually step forward, yes, with your left leg. And so to be in the affirmative is to be able to imagine and have images of possibility, to tell people what to do, not what not to do, to be able to describe possibilities, as opposed to, nah, ain't it awful, it's a problem, oh, here we go again. And so when I say to have an affirmative stance or an appreciative stance, that's what I mean. Right? Aristotle said a vivid imagination compels the whole body to follow it. And I learned that when I was taking flying lessons many years ago. There I was learning, just learning. I never did get my license, and this is probably why. Learning to fly an airplane, but I got more interested in looking down. Right? Now, if I had practiced a lot, I probably could have done it. But, you know, there's this notion, and there's so much now in neuroscience that talks about the affirmative and how it's healing and how we learn better. So it's my way of working and my belief that when we can bring an affirmative stance, we can have a much stronger process. And so with the folks in Idaho, you know, the first presenting situation to me was, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about the school? Should we close the school? What do we do? How do we convince people that we're not going to close the school? I don't think we're going to do that, right? We're not going to convince anybody of anything. So what if instead we host this meeting on services for students who are deaf and blind, and let everyone who's coming together be in dialogue about what services they believe are most important, and let them arrive at their own conclusion. Is this school still the best way to do it? Now, the principal of the school got a little nervous because now I'm saying maybe they won't choose the school. But that's what happens when we engage in these kinds of processes. So it was about, I think it was the morning of the third day, and it wasn't planned, but a couple people came up and said, when are we going to vote on the school? When are we going to vote on the school? That was interesting. So being a moderately flexible facilitator, I said to my client, what do you think? And he said, let's go for it. So we gave every table in the room, we didn't have an individual vote, we had table votes. Time to talk. Did they think, given everything they've heard, that the best way to go forward was to continue with the school or to find alternative ways to do services? They had half an hour to discuss it, and then each table, a room full of about 250 people, 8 people at a table. I don't know how many tables, that's a lot of tables. Every table got to vote. Every table said, yes, let's keep the school. And we want to keep the school, but we want more parental involvement. And here's what we're willing to do about it. We want to keep the school, but we want a new technology. And we're willing to work with the university and research what's possible. So every table said, yes, keep the school, but they had been in dialogues enough with each other that they could say, and we want to even do more. And we're willing to sign up for it. So we went immediately into groups. We use an open space kind of process where people can say, here's what I want to work on, come join me. Moved into groups to talk about and begin to design the prototypes. And when we left, there was a clear confirmation to keep the school. There was a series of new projects, which, by the way, were then presented to the Board of Education and the governor's office, and they were budgeted. So it really is a sort of happily ever after story. But it really shows the importance of continuing to work on that affirmative. Now, there's another piece that I want to say that has been one of the secrets, I think, to successful change, transformation work. And I learned it, fortunately, early in my career from another consultant. And that is the process you want, the result that you want, is the process you start with. So have you heard the expression, the Gandhian phrase, be the change you want to see? Right? So if we want a system that has citizen participation, right, we can't plan that without the citizens. So the first thing we have to do is create a microcosm of citizen involvement to plan full-blown citizen involvement. Right? The result you want is the process you start with. The old paradigm models of relating cannot lead you to new ways of organizing. You cannot, in an authoritarian, hierarchical way, say, you will participate, and expect people to participate. So if you wonder why there's resistance or something, one, it's normal. But it's also because we haven't engaged people. We say, people commit to what they help create. People commit to what they help create. So if the results that we want are participation, collaboration, relational, that's why I love appreciative inquiry. It is not about an icebreaker. It is about, let's sit down for an hour and a half, and I'm going to interview you for 45 minutes, and you're going to interview me for 45 minutes on this topic that is so important to us. Now, in the case, many of you have heard of the United Religions Initiative, a global organization, an interfaith organization that didn't exist. And now it exists. There are 800 cooperation circles in over 55 countries around the world. And the very beginning of that was to sit and meet with someone of a different faith, a different religion, a different spiritual tradition, and spend an hour interviewing them about their tradition and why peace building was so important to them, and how they came to interfaith work, and were there sacred traditions that mattered to them, and then to share your own stories. And so that really coming into being with another person is at the heart of appreciative inquiry, which is why I love it. okay? And it is at the heart of successful social design. I mean, I'm sure that the people who are designing driverless cars, I don't think they're spending time getting to know each other except over beer after work. I could be wrong. But generally, that starting from a foundation of true, sincere connectedness is what makes social design most effective. And then finally, the process must lead to prototypes. Experiments, not final, dot it, put a period at the end, this is now the way we're going to do it forever and ever. It's an experiment, and we have heard that through all of our speakers. Keynote speakers and workshops have all talked about how, well, we tried this. We had to learn and see what would happen if we brought animals in. Would people be allergic, afraid? Would they like it? And so when we create a prototype, we do so lightly. And we say it's going to be an experiment. And we're going to learn as much in the process of introducing it so that we can continue in that relatedness to be co-creating in an ongoing way. Another colleague, Frank Barrett, has written a fabulous book on improvisation. It's called Say Yes to the Mess. And there's an awful lot in Frank's book that is very meaningful to being able to live in this world that is, quite frankly, more in flux than it used to be. Or at least my world is. And how do we go forward with each other in a more improvisational way? Creating a prototype, putting it out. What do you think? Should we try this? Oh, maybe we should trade scarves, Lon. I really love that scarf. Maybe we should try trading scarves, and then a year from now, we'll get, I don't know. There's an experiment. Could I talk her into it? Who knows? I'd have to have a beautiful scarf like hers. But that living lightly and in a life of change. So what I want to say in conclusion then is that this way of working and living requires tremendous courage. Because we really are sort of mucking around with people's sacred cows and their identities, including our own. If we are sincere about meeting someone, talking to them, learning what really makes them tick, and then helping them have a good life at the same time, I'm going to have a good life. I'm probably going to change, right, in the process. And so it requires also deep humility. I at one point went, I went to school for a long time to become an expert. I got a PhD. I was going to be the boss. And now it's not fashionable anymore, right? It's just not cool. What is cool is to be collaborative, and it requires tremendous humility. Even when we think we know what's best for someone else, we've got to be willing to find out if that's what they think is best for them. So it's about giving voice to other people and partnering with them in a way that brings out our best and their best and the collective best. So we must be curious about the other, realizing that in the process, we are probably going to change as much as we're asking them to change. Thank you very much. Thank you.